determined that the best way to be a coach and a leader, quite frankly, is to be a facilitator, to again ask a lot of questions, to get people to think, get them to develop their own answers to problems so that they are able to stand on their own.
Hello, everyone. It's Melanie Johnson back with another great episode. We always have fabulous people here, and today we are so honored. We have Rich Tyson. He is the founder of CEO Builders. And oh my gosh, this company is amazing. Rich is amazing. I'm going to let him start off by telling us a little bit about his background. And you're going to want to watch this episode probably more than once because I know there's going to be a lot of great nuggets here. Rich, thanks for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us, how did you get started in CEO Builders?
Well, CEO Builder is a new company. We've been in business as of last month, 35 years. So,
My
so
gosh.
actually not very new. I started this business actually as a response to family needs. My dear wife said, "You're always on a plane and you're not here, and I need you to help raise children." And so I said, "I'll find a way to do what I do rather than always traveling, do it more on a local basis." So we live in the state of Utah, and it was tough starting because I had to go out and kind of knock on doors and build a clientele. But over the years I've done that. The path to getting here was fairly circuitous. If you go clear back to my business training, I graduated from Weber State University out of Ogden, Utah,
Wow.
um, in 1972. And I graduated with an acceptance to the Harvard Business School in my pocket. I graduated as a top business student there at Weber State. And but they said, "Hey, I was 21 years old at the time, and they said you need some experience. You're green." And so I took a job initially with Sherwin Paint Company, and it was my first turnaround. They gave me a store that was losing money in Livermore, California, and over a year I got it making money. And so that was my first success. Uh, During that time, I was offered a rather different opportunity. I was approached by Brigham Young University, Hawaii, and they said, "Would you come and be our financial controller for a couple of years?" And so I did that for the next 2 years and helped them get their first computer on campus. It really dates me, of course, and helped them with several other major issues they had, with the understanding that I would leave after the 2 years and go back from Laie, Hawaii to Boston, Massachusetts. And so I made that trek across the country with my wife and at that point one child, and 2 years at the Harvard Business School. I was a student body officer there, and I was one of three that actually got paid to be a student body officer. I vetted business plans for entrepreneurs. And then I also, while I was at the business school, I worked for the Jewel organization out of Chicago. Not too many people remember Jewel, but they were at the time the second largest retailer in the world. So a Fortune 100 company, and I did financial analysis for them. From there, when I graduated from Harvard, we went to Southern California, and in Southern California, I worked for Avery Label. I had 8 products that I was given P&L responsibility for, and I did that for a fairly short period of time until they made me a production manager, and I was over domestic production and helped them put in place a lot of their manufacturing systems. We decided at some point, and again, this is family issues, we didn't want to live in Los Angeles. We were not in a great area, a lot of crime and so forth.
Mhm.
And we packed up and went to Twin Falls, Idaho, where I took over an experience of turning around another organization, a newspaper that was failing, and did that for a couple of years and got it making money. Thought we would stay there forever. We enjoyed Idaho. But once it was turned around, I got a nice severance check from the publisher and sent on my way. And so I started my first entrepreneurial venture. I started a newspaper coaching and consulting firm, and I ended up with clients from Atlanta to Seattle and all over the country. A real heavy emphasis in the state of Arizona, so we moved to Arizona.
Yeah.
And in Arizona, we did this for a while, and then this takes you right up to the time that Ronald Reagan was running for president, and I was a big supporter of Reagan. And I ran into a fellow from Springville, Utah, who said, "I want to start a hard asset based brokerage company.
Mhm.
And would you help me start it?" His name is Howard Ruff. And very conservative economist. He brought me up to Utah and I helped him with that. But sat on his board. And Melanie, one of the things that has characterized me is that I ask a lot of questions. In fact,
Ah,
my mantra in CEO Builder is I'm not here to answer your questions, I'm here to question your answers. And so I sat on Howard's board right up to the point that he got tired of my questions. He said, I think you're a pessimist. Actually, I'm not. I'm very much an optimist, but I'm a realist. And so I ask a lot of questions. And so that got under his skin. And I, at that point, said, okay, I'm going to be an entrepreneur again. I started a general management consulting firm. And that's what put me on a plane all the time. I was all over North America. My typical week would be I'd fly out on a Sunday, be gone till Thursday or Friday, be with my family for a little bit, and then fly back out again. And so my wife tired of that, and we decided I should do it a different way. So this is how CEO Builder got its base, and a lot of the stops along the way, though, were really important to my development because I determined that the best way to be a coach and a leader, quite frankly, is to be a facilitator, to again ask a lot of questions, to get people to think, to get them to develop their own answers to problems so that they are able to stand on their own.
that's such an impressive background, Rich, of everything that you did in your education. And one of the key things that stands out to me is really learning to listen and ask those questions. And as business owners, so many times we don't ask ourselves questions. We're just running from one thing to the next. Why
Mhm.
is coaching so important for a business owner to stop and learn and be able to get those questions asked for them?
Well, I think you kind of hit it on the head. Really, a lot of being a leader, especially CEO or general manager, even a C suite executive, we get so involved in the day to day that it's whack a mole. We're just
Mhm.
always trying to put out the next fire. And as a result of that, we kind of lose the sense of what the guiding star should be, the true north, the purpose. Are we really focused where we ought to be? And that's where coaching can really be a great asset to you. One of my clients that I had years ago, his his secretary would call me once a month after he had met with his controller, and she said, "You got to get up here and meet with him. He's struggling." And I finally figured out what the cause and effect was. When he would meet with his controller, it was kind of a beating. He
Mhm.
Here's why the numbers aren't as good as they should be, and you need to be doing this, that, and the other thing. And he would get real frenetic about trying to solve things. And so his secretary would call and say, "You always calm him down." Well, when I got with him, I'd say, "Okay, let's think about where we are. What is the situation? What are the cause and effect? Let's get to root causes if we can,
Yeah.
and don't get into this whack-a-mole kind of behavior because all it's doing is driving you nuts. You can't sleep at night."
Yeah.
And so I finally figured out, and his secretary said this to me later. She said, I just know that you're a calming influence. Well, I guess he could take Valium and get the same effect. But the reality was, I would come and be able to coach him kind of off the edge of the cliff. But his controller played the opposite role. And the controller, one of the best financial minds I've ever known. So I don't mean to be denigrating to him,
Right.
but there is a role there to say, okay, step back, calm down, see where we go. And frankly, Melanie, for me, I have a business partner and CEO Builder, and he will do that for me. It's okay, Rich. I know you're juggling 14 different balls and you're frustrated. I can feel it. Calm down. Let me ask you some questions and get you to think through it.
Mhm.
And sometimes I think, can I just ask myself the questions? But the reality, I think this kind of role is valuable to anybody. And some people have said, well, you're my business therapist. And that makes me nervous because I don't have any degree in psychology. But that caring interaction, a lot of questions, and really for me, it's always been an intense focus on the
Mhm.
other person, making sure that I'm fully engaged. I
Yeah.
had one occasion where I had three women come to me as part of an organization, and they said, "We need a meeting with you." And I thought, I'm in trouble. They're after me for something. And they sat down with me and they said, "This probably seems strange to you. We wanted to give you kind of a group compliment." And I said, "Well, what is that?" And the answer was, we get 100% of you whenever we're with you. There's no smartphone, there's no computer that you're checking on. We get all of you.
Mm.
And I recognized in that moment that I had probably almost inadvertently slipped into that behavior, but it is to me.
In today's world, that's so hard to do, to give all of you. We're distracted by so many things. And I even find myself, if I'm some like just having a conversation on the phone and it's just a friend or something, sometimes I'm scrolling on the phone while I'm
Mhm.
listening to them, which is horrible, right? In your book, Align and Execute, you talk about the extreme sport of business.
Right.
Explain what you mean by that.
Well, I love that term. I think it's colorful, but let me give you a little bit of a metaphor for it. And you probably read this in the book, but one of the avocations that I've enjoyed over the years is canyoneering. So that involves getting in some really precarious situations,
Mhm.
dangling on a rope, often in a wetsuit, and going into waterfalls and some pretty intense situations. If you don't prepare yourself well for
Mhm.
that, that's a lethal sport. And I have taken clients on canyoneering experiences just to strengthen their sense of team building and so forth.
Yeah.
But we always prepare to the hilt. I can't afford to kill clients. And so, as a result of this, I look at it and I say, okay, if you could, in your mind, see somebody rappelling in a business suit with a briefcase in their hands, it's really kind of the world we're in every day. Now,
Yeah.
some days those are big cliffs and we're dealing with something that is almost existential for the business. Other days it's just the minor stuff. But so often, if we make little mistakes, they compound. And so part of the advantage of a coaching experience of somebody who has some depth, they that person doesn't always have to be
Yeah.
me, but that person needs to ask the good questions. And so going back to the repelling metaphor, have we checked out all our gear? Have we put people on a practice wall to repel? Have we given them experiences where they're going to have to, be in cold water? How are we preparing for all of those things? Again, I think those are great metaphors for just kind of the day-to-day of business. You
Yeah.
know, bad things happen and we can't prepare for all of them. But if we get into a preparatory mindset and we're thinking and we're asking good questions, and often, Melanie, this is the client coming back to me saying, well, you've made me think about this. What about that? And they're
Yeah.
putting me on the spot. That's good. And there was a time in my career where I was really nervous about that. I thought, boy, they're going to discover my flaws, my weaknesses, the gaps in what I know. That's okay. I mean, one of the most dangerous things with a coach is if you got a coach who thinks they know everything. It's a
True.
mistake. So,
One of the things I love about your book are all the great questions that you have in there. I mean, you just start off the book even with asking questions about your vision and your goals and things like that, and your strategies and your team and what's aligned. And what do you find when you go into a business? Is there like a reoccurring issue that's always going on that with you're like, okay, this has been consistent with all these companies, and once they fix that, that seems to make a big difference for them.
yeah. Well, you know the title of the book, Align and Execute. It's all about the money, but it's not.
Hmm.
I just know every time I walk into a new situation, it will be all about the money. Uh, they're going to be concerned about financials. And so I don't try to dodge that. That would be totally inappropriate. They should show me the door if I do that.
Mhm,
But if we can dig in and take a look at their financials and kind of see where they are relative to their industry, making sure we're looking at key ratios and so
mhm,
forth. I want to I call that learning in the moment of need. Let's address your need right now. But then, as we are getting acquainted and we're building toward, okay, what does that mean? What possible strategies could we take to improve these things? Then the issue becomes based on a growing trust. Let's talk about some other things. How do we get
mhm,
to an ultimate financial outcome? The reality is we have to do something exceptional for customers. The customers make that cash register ring. So let's talk about your value proposition and what you're selling and how you're working with your customers. And then while that is a leading indicator for profitability and financial outcomes, it's also a lagging indicator for what
Yeah.
you do in the operation in your business. And so I try to work them through those operational issues, questions there. And that again is a leading indicator for customer outcomes, but it's also a lagging indicator
Mhm.
for the competency and engagement of their people. And so we talk about those things. And then where those are a leading indicator, they're also a lagging indicator
Yeah.
for recruitment, getting the right people on the bus, as Jim Collins would say. And then I say, okay, that's not the ultimate though. What is your purpose, your vision, your values, your mission, what you do every day, so that we begin to build a comprehensive leadership view of things. But I have to come through the first door, and that is always let's talk about the money. One of the things I have referenced in the book is I've had some people say, well, at the end of the day, Rich, you sound like a life coach. And I said, well, there's some life coach in there, but that's not who I am. I am a business coach who recognizes that businesses have to function in the context of your life. And at the end of your life, you may well find that if you're not careful, you'll regret how you spent those years. The
Mhm.
very last class I had at Harvard, the last day actually at the Harvard Business School, and I'll never forget this, they gave us a case study. And of course, all of Harvard Business School is case studies. But this case study had a CEO of a very successful company, and he had just committed suicide. And he left a note that said, I thought I was doing everything the right way. I built this extraordinary business. This was, earlier in the 20th century. So he said, I made millions. Today, you probably want to say billions because of inflation. But he said, I've made millions, but I lost my wife. I lost my
Mm.
children. I don't know my grandchildren. I, my community really looks at me with disdain. I realize now as an old man, it wasn't worth it. I'm out of here. And the reason they shared that with us was they said, look, you're going to make decisions. You're going to have trade-offs in your life. Make sure that whatever you do, that you'll feel good about what you've done once
Mhm.
you're through this mortal experience. And so in that respect, yeah, I'm a life coach. But what I'm saying in the book is let's get to your core personal purpose and have that drive your business purposes.
Yeah.
And I think there's a higher probability that at the end of it all, you will find yourself feeling successful and fulfilled in what you've done. And part of it for me is I had a client say to me some years ago, he said, Rich, I wish you didn't care so much about me. Just care about my money. And I said, I probably can't be your coach. And he said, what do you mean? I said, if you're asking me to not care about you as a person, that doesn't work for me. That doesn't fit my purpose.
Yeah.
And we still work together, but he said, well, I still want you to kind of focus on the money. So, yeah,
The story that you told reminds me of it's the journey, it's the person you become through your business journey and your life journey,
that's
to keep that in mind. And you talked about vision, and I'm even finding with our company, we made a vision statement. We've been in business for 10 years, 10 years ago, and sometimes that vision statement or your vision evolves as technology changes. And is that okay to change your vision and your goals as you're moving along in your business?
Yeah, certainly. We're living in a very dynamic world. One of my great advisors and friends was the dean of the Harvard Business School some years ago, and he looked at what I was doing with CEO Builder at the time, and he said, Rich, you've got a great business concept, but it doesn't seem real scalable. People want Rich Tyson. How are you going to scale this? And I said, well, let me turn the question on you. What do you see? And he said, I think you're going to have to grasp and utilize artificial intelligence. And I said, tell me how. He said, I don't know. You're going to have to figure that out. So my vision for my business hasn't changed, but the mission, I think, has to transition into, hey, we're living in a new world.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence is coming into play. How do I use that? And more specifically, how do I use it to scale me? I don't know yet. I'm still trying to learn. But
Well, I can tell you how to do that. We know how to do that.
good, good.
I could
Good.
make a virtual clone of you of all of your content and information and even make it video where they're asking Rich. They can do a text message where they can type in, ask you questions, or you can pop up as you talking to them. It's pretty amazing. So we've been playing with that and using that for some of our content.
Well,
But we can
good.
talk about that later if you want. But Rich, your book, I want to encourage everyone to get Align and Execute. It's an amazing book. So many eye-opening things as I was going through it. I was like, oh yeah, we need to ask ourselves that again. And you forget to ask yourself those questions, don't you think?
Oh yeah, yeah. I don't think this is a one and done thing. In fact, I hope what people will not do. I mean, you could use my book and apply it to yourself and say, okay, I'll work through the processes, and we got some worksheets in there and so forth. And when I've finished it, I can put that on the shelf and never worry about it again. You asked the question, do visions change? Yeah, you should be revisiting this. And one of my favorite authors is Simon Sinek, and he talks in one
Yeah,
of his books, I think it's The Infinite Game. He says you need to be, as the leader, the chief vision officer, the CVO. And so I look at it and say, hey, if you're going to do that, you better understand this is a process, not an event. And if you don't revisit it and keep your passion alive for what your purpose is, who else is going to do that? Now, again, we know if we do it right, our teams will become more engaged and they will buy in and adopt and help us with that. But if we go to sleep at the wheel, it's going to begin to go into entropy. It'll go away.
and all the things I always like to revert it back to family. Usually I do it earlier in the interview, but everything that you're teaching is also for other aspects of your life of running a family.
Yeah,
Being that leader of the family and having the vision for what your family should look like and the goals for that of everything that you want to do. I think it applies to so many other variables of your life.
sure. Well, my wife and I have been married now 55 years.
Oh, that's
And, uh,
great.
we celebrated that last month as well. That was an anniversary. And we have 6 children, 18 grandchildren, and
Wow.
6 great grandchildren. And I believe in what I'm preaching. And so one thing I love about technology is I text all of my grandkids and great grandkids and stay in touch with them so that they know that grandpa's part of their life. And part
Yeah.
of that is sharing my values with them and my love, just that they know I care. And I had a elementary school teacher tell me this years ago when our kids were in that age. She said, "You and your wife are strange." And I said, "Oh, what does that mean?" And she said, "Well, you are highly engaged with your kids. We realize what we see in the classroom is that when they come home with homework, you sit down, you work with them. You don't do it for them, but you're asking questions and
Yeah.
trying to build on what they're learning in school." And I said, "Well, here's my personal philosophy. You school teachers are not babysitters. I expect you to teach, but the primary responsibility for teaching my children is me. I need to be engaged with them and help with that." And I've applied some of those philosophies as I've taught in some university programs, MBA programs, and so forth, where I've said, okay, my role as a teacher, especially if you're in a master's program, you should walk out of here with a mastery of the materials. And I can't control what other professors or teachers are doing. But for me, when you take a test and you get 80% right, well, that's a solid B. I guess you're satisfied. I'm not satisfied with that. That's not mastery.
Right.
So I've always said, hey, if you're willing, what I see as 80% grade is you have 20% shortcoming. So I'll work with you. If you'll put the time in, so will I, so
Yeah.
that at the end of this course you will have 100%. And
That's
most
great.
people don't even want to take advantage of that. It's like, no, I got other things to do, and I get it.
They're
But at
okay
the
with that. Yeah.
yeah, but I look at it and say, okay, what was I hired to do? Was I hired to get you 80% of the way there? Now, it's not brain surgery. I know that.
Yeah.
So, but I do use that metaphor. If you had a brain surgeon who was an 80% student, are you happy about that? So um,
That's true.
I'd
You
like
want
to
the
think of
100% surgeon on you working on your brain. That's so
that's
true.
right. And so I'd like to be a bit closer to that, not to imply in any way I'm perfect, but I feel like you ought to be worthy of your hire. And so I apply that again to my family. Are they getting 100% of me? It kind of goes back to the three
Mhm.
women talking to me and saying, well, we're so grateful we get all of you.
Yeah,
So
that you're there. Well, Rich Tyson, author of Align and Execute, go get the book. It's on Amazon and everywhere books are sold. You can find it Barnes& and Noble, Target, online, Walmart. It's everywhere, and it's a bestseller. So #1 bestseller, so go grab that book. And Rich, thanks so much for coming today. And if anyone else is thinking about writing a book, reach out to us at Elite Online Publishing. We work with all of our authors to have a concierge wonderful experience, and even if you have an idea, we can help the book from beginning to end to get #1 bestseller and written. See you next time. Have a great week, everybody. Hey, are you looking to increase your revenue, build credibility, and elevate your brand? This podcast is brought to you by Elite Online Publishing, an innovative publishing and full spectrum marketing company. They will publish and market your book to make it a #1 bestseller. Becoming an author is the best way to market your business. So contact them at eliteonlinepublishing.com today. All of their authors become #1 bestsellers.